All right, so you have found yourself in the class called The Buddhist Keys to Better Relationships. And I tried to make that kind of general because it's every kind of relationship. Do you want Buddhist keys for your love life? Hey, we got them. Do you want Buddhist keys for dating? Wow, yeah. I mean, I don't know much about online dating, but communication is communication. Do you want the Buddhist keys for handling your mother-in-law at Thanksgiving? We got them. Okay, so it's every kind of relationship. That's what this is for. And why is it Buddhist? Well, you're gonna see all of the tools that I'm going to teach you. Many of you, if you're in a communication class, you've probably heard of nonviolent communication called NVC. And a while back, I thought I should come up with a thing called Zen VC, which is like, because I found, and many other practitioners found, that in order to be able to even do nonviolent communication, we have to have a significant number of like nervous system regulation tools online already. And in the way that Dr. Rosenberg taught that system, he made it, the whole idea was it's about sharing from the heart. But then as a purveyor of compassionate communication, I hear from a lot of people, they get turned off by nonviolent communication because people use it as a way of like, you didn't meet my needs, and then I feel this, and we're trying to kind of like emotionally manipulate each other with this tool that was supposed to be about sharing from the heart. And so as I practiced, I found that the tools of yogis and meditators and Zen people actually apply directly to that, because that's also the goal of these inner contemplative traditions. It's about being able to have this kind of sort of unguarded and radiant heart. And in contemplatives, they're usually practicing that far away in a cave. That's where a lot of the tradition comes from. But the notion is those same tools could be applied to our relationship. So not a lot of that work has been done. This is part of the yogic tradition, like the tantric traditions of the Himalayas. The whole idea was to take the insights from the cave and do them in your business, do them with your spouse, do them with your kids, to take those yogic insights. But that's also still a pretty esoteric tradition. So far, we either have interpersonal training or psychological, being well adjusted, and then we have kind of spiritual trainings and going into state experiences. And one of the things that I really want to present in this class is that the wealth of information from the cultivators of state experiences deeply informs our personal and interpersonal growth. So, Buddhist keys to better relationships. Ooh, right on time. That was the quickest intro I've ever done. And we are going to dive in to the keys. Okay, Marianne, we'll see you when you're back, if that happens. Let's see. Ooh, I think I have a little slide I can give you for these keys, and that's just sometimes a fun way to play, isn't it? So I just have to open it up in order to screen share. Here we go. It's an overview. That's fun. Oh, look at that. Can you see that slide? The 3 Buddhist keys to better relationships. So here they are. The wording may change, but these are just the ideas. So number 1, find your inner resource. Number 2, share from the radiant heart. Number 3, emphasize choice and empowerment. And just in case you follow kind of some of my other stuff in the Qigong that we do in temple style and some of these others, these relate to your 3 main psychoenergetic centers of the head, the heart, and the gut. And the slogans that I use are lucid wakefulness, open-hearted compassion, and dignified embodiment. So the nice thing is the whole course, all 3 lessons are going to center around these 3 tenets, and they also play into your yogic practice, into your qigong practice, into your tai chi practice. So it's not a lot to memorize. It's more that we're going to try to embody these and then find a bunch of different applications where these same principles can apply. So finding your inner resource has to do with lucid wakefulness. Sharing from the radiant heart has to do with open-hearted compassion, obviously. emphasizing choice and empowerment has to do with our dignified embodiment. So that's what we are into. You ready to get started with number one? Numero uno? Well, let me put up the slide for number one. Just one second here. Come on. I made them not just for marketing, but because they look cute. Okay, where's that cute guy? Who's the inner resource guy? There he is. Okay, one sec. Here's inner resource guy. Oh yeah, this is gonna be fun. I don't know if I'll be able to look at my notes while we have inner resource guy up though. So that should be an interesting challenge, but let's find out. Here we go. Hey, it's inner resource guy. All right. Okay, so number one, find your inner resource. Find your inner resource. So what does this mean? Well, I want to tell you, this is the Buddhist keys to better relationships. And Buddhists don't traditionally call themselves Buddhists. Buddhists don't traditionally. And it's not kind of the thing like, oh, Jesus wasn't a Christian, Buddha wasn't a Buddha. No, but there's a name that, Buddhist is this Western invention, and it works pretty good. Bud in the Sanskrit means wakefulness, like lucidity. And so practitioners like me we're lucidityists. We worship lucidity. We worship presence above all. But in traditional Buddhist cultures, from the time of the Buddha, Buddhists called themselves insiders. They referred to themselves as insiders. I'll even put it in the chat box. Why? Because that helps me learn. I need to do somatic things to accentuate different points. So insiders. And down through the ages, fundamentalism gets rampant in any tradition. And so some people use this as like, oh yes, we are the insiders and everyone else are the outsiders. But that's not what it originally meant. It's not at least what my lamas have taught me. Before I start sounding like a fundamentalist myself, it's not what it really means. It's not what my lamas have taught me this means. It actually means that for a practitioner of this type, for a contemplative of this type, we're more concerned with regulating the interior circumstances, the interior environment, than we are with regulating the exterior circumstances, the exterior environment. Or you could say, we find refuge inside rather than attempting to find refuge from the outside. Okay, so what does this mean? Because this is principle number one, finding the inner resource. Let me look at these notes and see what it's supposed to mean. Oh yeah, so it would be nice, don't you think it would be nice if we could find the perfect circumstances? Has anybody ever longed for the perfect circumstances? I can't be the only one. Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? And then especially like if you've ever had a long-term intimate relationship or something like that, wouldn't it be nice if they just acted right? If they just shape up and act right. Okay. Most of us are old enough now to recognize that that's not a dependable source of security or happiness. Most of us are old enough to realize it now. It's not a dependable source. So I want to bring up co-regulation. Have you heard this term, co-regulation? Right? It's a hot term right now. Really cool. And it's because Homo sapiens actually are built to co-regulate. Like we shake off trauma really well by interpersonal interaction, right? So don't get me wrong. I am not dissing co-regulation. I want you to have the perfect partner, mother-in-law, nephew twice removed or whatever, all of those things. That would be great. But if you base your happiness or sense of security on those, you are likely to be more stressed out than you need to be. In traditional sort of mystic influenced martial arts, the whole point where Buddhists and Taoists adopted these martial arts practices, one of the main ideas was that they were training you how to have a somatic experience of the center of gravity inside your own body, not elsewhere. If you have your center of gravity out here, how easy are you to push over, right? If your head is not lined up over your feet, you are much more likely to fall. If your center of gravity is inside and down low, you become a much more stable person. So this is principle number one, finding the inner resource. Okay, so we're old enough to know the Rolling Stones were right. You can't always get what you want. And I'm guessing everyone in this class is old enough to even know that song reference. I won't make it on TikTok if I do a promotional video on there, but I think on here, we can know what I'm referencing. So here's your takeaway about finding the inner resource. Buddhist practice of insiders. What that means is it's about changing your own state. It's about changing your own state. So we can want other states to change. We can work to change other states. We can hire, like, of course, hire the best attachment therapist you can find because you want them to help change your state, of course. But some of us have found out, you go through 5 therapists and you're still suffering because it's not dependable, right? So something that is pretty dependable is if we can learn to change our own state. This is finding the inner resource. Hey, Carla, welcome. We also know how sort of stressful it can be. Maybe you've been in a relationship where you felt the other person was dependent on you to manage their state. Have you ever been in a relationship like this? It's not like the most relaxing thing, is it? Right. So, like I said, this is the Buddhist keys to better relationships. In some cases, that's going to be your job, right? Like if you have, a mom who had, some neurological change, and maybe they need someone to regulate their state. Like, okay, great. That's part of your covenant with them. But in terms of creating rapport, creating these equilateral relationships, if we can come taking responsibility for our own resource primarily, that's where we're going to create this open space where real beautiful rapport can happen. Yeah, and sometimes we're dependent on others for our state as well. So the idea is, I'm kind of like trying to be careful here on a tightrope, because the idea in my life is that if someone is distressed, I of course want to be a resource for them. This is not the excuse now to go, oh, find your inner resource. Why are you, put your center of gravity back where it belongs, okay? And calm down. You got an issue, here's a tissue. You're your own inner resource. I'm an insider, okay? And you're on the outside right now. No, that's not the idea. That's not the idea. The idea is there are tools by which we can learn to create our own inner states. And when we do that, it frees up so much of the challenges that can happen in relationships. So principle number one is find your inner resource. Next week, we're going to apply that to like how to have arguments and stuff. This week, it's just about general principles. Okay, come on, Rev Faj, it's a 45-minute class. Let's keep going. So how do you do it? How do you do it? Oh yeah, let's see here. So yeah, this note, it can be gratifying to serve another, but it's not always the basis for sharing, right? So we will serve each other, like in a partnership, for example, we are going to be one another's resource. But if you've been in a relationship that's sort of one-sided, those relationships tend to get hierarchical or contractual, and yeah, that's a real word. And that's not the basis for this kind of open-hearted sharing that we're looking into. Okay, so how do you do it? I have 3 tips. Let me put them in the chat box for you. Some of you have seen these before, but it's a nice review. So we're going to practice these right now. The first one is the 2-to-1 ratio breathing. My favorite. I was just reading research today that this, like, it hacks your, what do they call it? Heart rate variability. It hacks your HRV which hacks your vagus nerve to bring you out of these weird states of fight, flight, and freeze. Really cool practice. And we're going to do this with a form of resourcing that I learned from somatic experiencing with a nature image. The second one is the self-compassion kata, and the third one is the red, yellow, green light system. So let's get into it. If you're ready, we're going to do a little practice, mini practice. So find yourself a comfortable spot. Comfortable as you can get, you know, the resources inside. So if you're uncomfortable outside, well, we'll see what we can do. But notice how you feel. Notice what you notice. We don't have to change the environment around us unless you do. And then starting to go within just for the time of this practice, take a listen to your breath. Without changing it, just notice your inhales and your exhales. And we're going to practice this ratio of breathing where the exhales are twice as long as the inhales. So if you inhale to 4, and that's what I'm going to count, feel free to breathe on your own if my count is not correct for you. But if you were to inhale to 4, 3, 2, 1, then you would exhale to 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's try it again. 4, 3, 2, 1, and then exhale, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Once more with me, 3, 2, 1. Exhale, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then just try that breathing pace on your own a couple rounds. Okay, then letting that go. Check in again with how you feel and notice any changes that have taken place. And our second exercise is called resourcing with a nature image. And I'd like you to just imagine someplace you've been in nature where you felt especially at ease and maybe also especially empowered, like a power spot or a sacred spot. Maybe it's a temple you visited in Greece, or maybe it's a canyon in Hawaii, or your backyard and a tree stump. Just call that place to mind like a sacred power spot. And imagine as clearly and easefully as possible that you were sitting in that spot. Its sights and sounds and smells were surrounding you, and like you were being infused with the power of that place. Just let yourself enjoy that for a moment. Okay, then when you're ready, take a couple deep breaths and bring the energy of that power spot back with you to this conversation, this place and time. All right. How does that feel? Anybody want to share just briefly something they noticed in either the breath or the power spot resourcing? What was something that you noticed? or a question? What do you say, Carla?
Such joy.
Oh, wonderful.
Joy.
Yeah, in meditative traditions, sometimes they call it that intrinsic joy, which is once we stop worrying about it, there's actually a natural joy that can bubble up. So how beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. Other experiences? What do you say, Kat?
I wasn't breathing. I totally wasn't breathing.
Before we started, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah. You said
Yeah.
listen to your breath, and I had to sit there for a good 20 seconds before I, inhaled again.
Yeah.
So that was interesting.
Yeah, that'll happen. Life gets us going and we just forget to even breathe. So it's good to take a class to remind us sometimes. Let's see what else. Presence and relaxation. I'm seeing in the chat box. Beautiful. Stop thinking and started feeling. Yeah, beautiful. What do you say, Janelle?
So there was like chaos in the house right before we did this. And I was like, and then I was like, no, I'm doing breathing. I'm doing breathing right now. And it completely shifted the whole perspective in my mind to the situation that was happening. Like in a split second, I was like, oh, now I feel compassionate for what's going on. And I was no longer mad about it. It was like instantaneous. It was pretty incredible.
That is some good work there, in my opinion. Amazing. And it's a great little segue for the explanation that I want to get across. Is this is one of the things in the meditative tradition that I'm coming from, is you'll have heard like meditations are like, okay, now sit down and stop thinking and have inner peace. And if you're anything like any other human, like you don't just say, like that doesn't just happen because you say it. Oh, stop thinking, derp, derp, derp. No. So a lot of time the meditation tradition is not about whether you're having thoughts or not. It's about the type of presence that you're there with them with, right? And similarly, the inner resource, I think you nailed it, is not about whether your house is chaotic, or even what's interesting is some of our own traumas or things that come up. It's how can we be with them? And the whole notion, this principle number one, is that there can be a sacred place in us from which we can be with all of this stuff. It doesn't make the stuff stop. It doesn't make it, not a problem that needs fixing or something like that, but it makes it not the same kind of a problem or not as destabilizing. We've got this little center of gravity from which we can operate, right? So very much like these esoteric martial arts, the word for them is bushi, which literally means, I looked this up because I thought it meant something else. I had been translating it wrong. And the shi means like a sage or like a wise person. And then the bu means like the chaos of war. And so the whole path of Bushido, the Tao of Bushi, is how to be a sage amidst chaos. That's what the inner resource can bring to us. And the idea of these, this is what the yogis would practice, is that it's unlikely that chaos is finally going to listen to our pleas to it to calm down, por favor. Instead, what we have a handle on is what we bring to it. Yeah. Okay, principle number one. Let's see the other two. Okay, so that was, and what about the resourcing with the power spot? Was that fun? I like that one myself. So the notion, hopefully you got a sense of it somatically, is that we can change our state. You actually just changed what hormones were playing in there and which part of your vagus nerve was toned up and all that kind of stuff. So pretty gnito. Okay, the self-compassion kata, we're going to do just the beginning of it, which is really quite simple. Imagine how you would like to be loved. Imagine how you would like to be loved. Oh, if I could have any kind of love. And you're going to imagine that your hands now become little beacons of that, little emitters of that. And just put them over your heart, please. And do the 1 minute self-compassion practice. And just imagine that your hands are sending you the kind of love you might want. Let's do the other one. It's also, these are evidence-based practices for, soothing anxiety. This one is you take your right arm, you tuck it into your armpit to get at your heart meridian. You take your left arm and you hug over and you do a self hug. And then same thing. What kind of love would you want to be loved with? And you just imagine, oh, that felt good. All right, cool. So these are some tools. If you were blessed with the perfect therapist, well then, gosh darn it, make an appointment. If you were blessed with the perfect partner, then have them sit down. They're always ready to process with you. So have them sit down and give you the love you need. But if you're like the rest of us thus far, now you have a couple tools by which you can find your inner resource. The last one, this is the Pith Essentials course, but is the red, yellow, green light system. I teach this to couples because escalating ourselves until we're out of until we can't resource is pretty bad for relationships, research shows. But so I tell them, start to have a system. Are you in the yellow? Are we having a serious conversation? Are you in the red? You can't generate empathy for the other person now. If you're in the red, you go in the other room and you do some of these self-resourcing practices. What I want to share with you is we can also know these, and then there are some places in us where we're still like we're tuned to yellow by default, or we're tuned to red by default. This is a place where don't take this inner resource thing too far. Stay on your meds, or go to the marriage and family counselor, or go to a meditation group where you can co-regulate. Like I'm saying, oh, you can make your own chemical change. But even though it's online, we're doing this in a group. We're co-regulating while I'm saying find your lonely inner resource power spot. So this is just, I want you to know that, like, if you can't find that, it doesn't mean something's wrong. It just means, oh, you're in red. So green is that resource spot, and everyone's tools for finding this inner resource or getting back there are going to be different. The challenge I want to give to you is start to find out what those tools are for you. What are the tools that can bring you from red through yellow back to green of that relaxation response, that inner resource? Okay, principle number 2. Let me get the slide for it because that's just fun. And we got to keep going here. So we're going to get all 3 done tonight. We're doing pretty good. Okay, not that slide. Okay, there we go. That slide. Here it comes. Here it comes. Okay, principle number 2. Share from the radiant heart. Share from the radiant heart. Okay, what does that mean? Well, I have to look at my notes to tell you, because that's what helps me keep class going on time and not just rant. All right, so and this is where my work is going to kind of differ from what you may have learned in nonviolent communication if you have studied that kind of stuff. And it's one of the places I'm always looking for, where can we make nonviolent communication less annoying to people? Because the tools are so good. And I really hate it when I see another friend on the internet and they're like, nonviolent communication, they're shutting down my feelings and making me make I statements. And then they're like, I needed you to do this and it's my need. Okay, so we're gonna hack our feelings and needs with the idea of the radiant heart. Okay, to begin, our cultural trance, one of my Buddhist lamas calls it the consumerist cultural trance. Consumerist cultural trance. Okay, he calls it the problematic consumerist cultural trance. And here's the thing: when we don't have inner resource, then that's a problem, and we go look for things to fix the problem. Okay, so step 1, we don't have inner resource, we don't have lucid wakefulness, we're not able to settle in that inside center of gravity. And so it's really weird. If we knew what was going on, we'd know we were making the problem worse. But if we go, oi, I feel uncomfortable because my center of gravity is outside. What if I put it further outside in order to try to fix the problem? So the radiant heart idea is my attempt to give us some poetry to practice that with. So one of the things in our consumerist cultural trance is that it says something like, okay, so it's holiday season. It says like, the type of Christmas that's fun for little kids is the best kind of Christmas. Which kind is that? Well, that's the kind where you get stuff. You get a bunch of stuff, right? But what you notice as you grow up, as you mature a little bit, is that like the stuff wears off pretty quickly. Did you notice this? Like new stuff, like adults, sometimes if you give them something useful, like, oh, that's cool. Oh, wow, a really sensible new car. Oh man, and a lifetime pass to the oil change place. Whoo, what a gift. But like stuff, it kind of fades pretty quick. It fades pretty quick. And there's a reason for this neurologically. New stuff, novelty, tends to give us this quick dopamine hit. Wow, new stuff, new. And then the problem with that is things don't stay new for very long. Things don't stay new for very long. So we have to hack these other aspects of our brain. And the interesting thing is, if you just learned the adult version of Christmas, you would have a great life hack. The adult version of Christmas is when you recognize that, like, if you can find someone the perfect gift for them, have you felt the kind of happiness that brings? Giving someone the perfect gift and like watching their soul light up. That's the sustainable aspect of our human happiness. So in the traditions, in Buddhist tradition in particular, they say that this is actually where human happiness comes from. And our cultural trance has just gotten us a little bit skewed to think that happiness is going to come from getting others to act the way we want, scoring this new thing, getting all these things. It's not to say that those aren't necessities, right? We need a certain amount of food for our bodies to work right. And then like my weird body, like I need a certain amount of carbs or my brain tells me that we're depressed because it doesn't make enough serotonin if I don't eat enough carbs. I tried that keto, I tried the paleo, man, not fun. There's intrinsic joy, but then the other, there ain't none other kind of joy there. So we do need those things, but they say those are like, oh, conventional happiness or something like that. And there's a pervasive happiness with, similar to the inner resource. The only way that gets better is by sharing it with another. And those of you who are in helping professions, you've felt this, right? Or you've done volunteerism. It's the helper's high. And the helper's high, you could actually think, if you think of that inner resource, the helper's high is basically the feeling you get when you've given that to someone else, when you've lit up their inner resource. Something about our human spirit is gratified. And according to these contemplative traditions, they say that's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking for. So in the Buddhist keys to better relationships, you can see why people would be pissed off about nonviolent communication, which says, well, your primary techniques is tell them what happened and then how it made you feel and what you were actually needing. And already, instead of this orientation toward let's create this deeper resource together from a radiant heart, it's I didn't get my needs met. And so then I felt like this. It's not to say, I'm walking these kind of tight ropes to try to quickly share some really, really potent stuff. It's not to say you're not allowed to share your feelings. No, it's super crucial and important. But the best relationships, the most juicy, like fabulous relationships, come from vulnerability. Rapport always comes from vulnerability. And in this case, what I want to give, maybe this is more for the advanced students or something like that. The vulnerability is our ability to share our feelings and needs as a gift with no expectation that the other person was supposed to feel them. to share our feelings and needs as a gift without the expectation that the other person was supposed to fulfill them, right? So again, we can contrast this, right? This is just the speed run class, and then we're going to apply this more in the coming weeks. But you've been in relationships probably, hopefully not for too long, where the other person's feelings were your fault. Have you been in those? Have you experienced that? I mean, if anything was the opposite of rapport, that's the opposite of rapport. Some of you have even been in relationships where someone did what sounded like a compassionate communication technique, and they were sharing their needs with you, but it sounded like they were sharing that like you were expected to have met that need, right? It's totally different. So imagine for a minute, like you had a good friend and they were sharing their need without any expectation that it's your fault that it's unfulfilled, right? For a lot of us, the radiant heart actually wants to help them get their need met. Does that make sense? Right? When you've got a friend and they're like, they've taken the expectation, and then they're just like, when we share our sadness, our frustration, our confusion, the natural human tendency, those are our common humanity. And so when we share those without these expectations and shoulds and appointments, the needs and values that live in our hearts are actually a bridge from heart to heart. But when we put on there our, well, you're not good enough, I'm going to have to withdraw some of my affection until you meet my needs, then we've done the opposite of rapport. So principle number 2 is share from the radiant heart. If you have that inner resource, we can let go of our appointments so we don't have to be disappointed by others. That doesn't mean you can't have boundaries. Your boundaries actually become much more effective because you're not dependent on them for your center of gravity. And so it's really quite amazing how easy it is when you're not dependent on another for your resource to just drop them if they're being toxic, or to just be able to say, like before, you're afraid to make a boundary. And in this case, it's like, look, I'm going to need you to stop doing that. It's really not working for me. We can do that with a radiant heart much better than we can with a closed or consumerist or kind of like unable to be vulnerable in that way heart. Okay, so there's a sense of this yogic fearlessness, but the good news, they say, is this is who you are. We've been habituated opposite of that, and you can tell that it's opposite of who we are because it doesn't work in our relationships. It doesn't make us happy when we're behaving in that way. Oh, you didn't meet my needs, and then I felt sad. Now, don't you feel sad that I feel sad? Aren't you going to change your behavior? Not only does that not get the behavior change you want most of the time, have you noticed? But it also doesn't feel good. It's not joyful. It's not the kind of like beauty we can find in sadness or anger or even sacred confusion. Ooh, there's a title for the next workshop, right? You can find a beauty in those when we are willing and able to be radiantly vulnerable. Okay, last one. Okay, so how do you do it? All right, the how-to: avoid playing who's right and go instead for sharing from the heart. What we tend to do is our brains tend to go, oh, I feel so bad that someone must be wrong here. If I just figured out who was wrong, then I wouldn't feel so bad. That doesn't tend to work. So we just have to habituate ourselves to that we can share without a zero-sum fallacy. I can be sad without you being wrong. I can be angry without having to dehumanize another person. We can actually come from this intrinsic radiance. If that's too abstract, next week we're going to get into like, well, how does this play out in conflict? Okay, so we're going to avoid who's right, and we're going to hone toward sharing from the heart. Okay, our last principle, and then we will have gotten into it. We're a little bit over time. Pardon me for that. Our last principle is to emphasize choice and empowerment. to emphasize choice and empowerment. And obviously this is about your gut center down here, your center of power. This is the antidote to a number of things, but the main thing is negativity bias. This is an innate shortcut in the human brain that really served our ancestors, because if you forget where a delicious berry patch is, you'll probably survive. There's other berry patches to be found. If you forget where the dire wolf's lair is, you probably won't survive. So our brains are honed to remember crummy stuff much faster and easier than we are to remember epic stuff. When we're in relationship, when we're talking about social new current events, that's what it's called, all of this kind of stuff, our brains naturally want to go toward the negativity bias, which feels disempowering. Have you tried listening to the news or like looking at social media? Have you noticed that it's a circus of disempowerment most of the time? Like, unless you've really curated, it's about, because there's something gratifying to that part of us that feels like we're being well prepared. If you're afraid, if you're confused, if you're sad, if you're shocked, you're well prepared. That's okay. The kids aren't listening. That's bullshit. That's total, I call bullshit on that. Because when you're stressed out, our stress response is meant to be in the moment. The lion jumped at you, whoa, and you got out of the way, right? That's what the human stress response is for. When you watch the news, it does that, and then it just keeps on going. And you actually develop this thing that in positive psychology they call learned helplessness, that you get this ongoing stress response and no sense of agency, and it just wears you down. Okay, what does this have to do with our relationships? Well, I'm so glad you asked. In relationship, when there is, this one's kind of directed at finding our way through conflict or finding our way through difference, is when conflict comes up, there's a tendency in the brain to just keep on going with how worrisome it is, how saddening it is, how maddening it is, how confusing it is. And if we had one question, a magic question, we could actually cut through that tendency of our brain. And that is, how am I called to choose? How am I called to choose? So I want to give you this question. You can play with it this week. If you look at the news, one of the things you'll notice, even on good old, I like NPR, they might be bought and paid for leftist something or other, I don't know, but I like them. Even on there, unless you're watching Science Friday, most of the stuff doesn't give you what do you do about it. They say, oh, this happened in Congress, blah, blah, blah. And they don't say, so here's what war tax withholding or resistance looks like. They don't say, here's when the next election, they don't like, here's the next election, here's what you have to do, here's this. Those would be things that you would hear that stuff, it would stress you out, and then your brain could do what we're supposed to do with that stress, which is to get very, very motivated. Very, very motivated. If we don't have that, if your friends are like, oh, this is an apocalypse, notice how rarely does anybody ask, well, what do we do? Right? We just love to rant about the apocalypses. We love to do this in our relationships. So we'll talk all about have to and should and can't, and how these magic words are sort of encoded into, I don't think it was even on purpose, but what we've ended up with is a society that tends toward disempowerment. We tend toward disempowerment. If we ask, how am I called to choose? We have a couple of really important power points, which are, one, we can find where our choices are, right? What are my options? What are my directions? And two, we can also get really clear on where we don't have any power or influence in the situation. And then we can let them go with a good conscience. So it's the old, this is His Holiness the Dalai Lama's favorite quote from a Buddhist text. If there's something I can do about it, why should I worry? AKA, just do something about it. If there's nothing I can do about it, why should I worry? AKA, you can't do anything about it, right? So when we ask, how am I at choice? We have a fundamental empowering question that can change the entire orientation. It can change how our brain is using stress. Whoa. When we're in relationship, this then allows us to find out, are we choosing together? Am I telling the person, oh, you have to treat people like this? Oh, you can't go off work, blah, blah, blah. We could be asking, okay, if you're choosing that, here are the consequences. I'm choosing this. Would you like to choose with me? And our relationships become co-empowering, even if we're making different choices. Well, we got through all three, just a few minutes over time. But this is our introduction. I'll stay on for a couple minutes after class to take any questions or just chat about it before I go have my dinner. But these are three facets of presence, and presence is what underlies the quality of rapport, which is what we feel when a relationship is really juicy. Like even sometimes we've had relationships with people we don't agree with or don't even like all that much, but the relationship is good and really juicy. When that happens, it's because we've got this type of presence. When we're relating with ourselves and it's really juicy, it's because we're not going into should and can't. We're not going into making appointments that then we get to be disappointed about ourselves. We're coming from this radiant quality of heart, this fundamental vulnerability. So this is your intro, the Buddhist keys to better relationships. In our next class, we're going to apply them to difference and conflict and diversity and disagreement. So it'll get a little more clearer there. And then our last class is all about specific situations and maybe even situations that you request we go over. But that is our class for tonight. Study those three principles in the intervening week. And next week, we will take it deeper. Thanks so much for being here.